This is the Open University.
Happiness is a byproduct of absorption. That is a saying of T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, and I'm not quite sure what form absorption took for him. Perhaps it was being a British imperialist and strangling Arabs, and I don't know enough about his life. It's a line not used in the film Lawrence of Arabia with Peter O'Toole. Peter O'Toole, who was going to feature in the role of Captain Cat in Under Milkwood on the cover of my new album, which is now scheduled for release on July the 14th, the same day as Niche, my memoir. And the new album is, of course, called Vivid. It was going to be called Vivid Old Man, potentially, because that was the title I was jokingly using for David Bowie's 2013 record. When I, like a sort of fortune teller, sightseer, a seer, not a sightseer, although I was a sightseer as well, when I predicted that he was going to release a new record after 10 years of absence. Anyway, absorption, it's one of the things that really absorbs me is being a graphic designer. And I when I was a teenager, I really thought I was going to be either an industrial designer or a graphic designer. I really liked that idea. I used to read Design magazine in the art classroom at school, and I didn't really plan to go to university. I planned to become some kind of visual professional, because I get very absorbed in the visual. I used to sit there tracing adverts, and there's a kind of fetish that designers have, almost like Melanesian cargo culters, these kind of people who worship commodity capitalism in the role of commodity fetishists. They sort of worship the kind of aura and allure of capitalism more than the simple logistical process of supplying people with goods, manufacturing and consuming goods. It's more than that. Advertising is all about adding value and giving this kind of mystical aura of spiritual values, essentially, which kind of works like a halo around the fairly banal and stupid process of creating the things people need or the things people might want to buy. So I was interested in that spiritual dimension, and I would do advertising for instance, the Scripture Union. At my school, I would put up posters for them without going to their meetings myself. I was just interested in the idea of advertising God as a product or religion as a product. So, occasionally I ask myself, why don't I make music all year? Because it's so profoundly, vocationally fulfilling to do that. But it's also very fulfilling for me to work on visual projects. So half the time I delegate the sleeve designs of my albums to visual professionals, and I've worked with people, either photographers like Pierre Rigil or British graphic designers like Paul White, who made Momus, or friends of mine who were also visual professionals like Vicky MacDonald or Tommy Wroblewski, Florian Perret, whose speciality was 3D animation. So he rendered a fantastic sleeve for Oscar tennis champion in 2003, with his skills at making essentially animated movies using 3D software. So every designer, every visual professional has a slightly different slant and a different skill. And sometimes you get someone who's a great typographer, James Goggin, for instance, who I worked with on Aukie Milk. Sometimes they'll be great typographers and sort of conceptual designers. Hagen Verlager, who's been my most recent regular designer, is like that. He's both very much focused on typography, and he's getting, as he gets older, more interested in sort of wide-scale educational design, conceptual design, design in the widest possible sense as a way of improving the world. So less visually oriented in some ways, but in other ways very detail-oriented. Because I'm a frustrated graphic designer myself, I tend to do every second project, let's say, as a rough rule of thumb myself, including the very first record sleeve I did, my very first album, when I turned down the chance to work with 23 Envelope, Vaughan Oliver, who's recently died last year, unfortunately, because I wanted so much to make my own sleeve design. And I made a really horrible sleeve. I wish I had worked with 23 envelope, Nigel Grierson and Vaughan Oliver. But, you know, it has been a great satisfaction just having the power to do at least my own sleeves. I don't do graphic design for anyone else. I do collaborate very closely with book jacket designers, for instance. Occasionally I've done my own book jackets, like UnAmerica. But often I also, like the Alex Murto cover that's going to accompany Niche when it comes out, I will just sort of give my ideas and tell the designer my fetishes, and do, in this case, I did like 20 or 30 pastiche covers and sent those to Alex. And so he got a very strong sense of my tastes. And I think it's interesting, as in music, you know, graphic design is a way to express your aesthetic prejudices or preferences. It's one reason I'm kind of a dilettante, jumping from discipline to discipline. So it's kind of fun to be so immersed in music and then to withdraw from that at the end of a recording process, and then to be suddenly immersed in the visual symbolism for the same record, because you kind of know what you've been talking about in lyrics and in music, what references you've been making to culture here and there. But to go into a new medium and to express that same idea in as simple and effective a graphical form as possible is kind of exciting. So I think if you just were doing music all year, you'd become monomaniacal. And so this is a way to be duo-maniacal or trio-maniacal, you know, if you include making videos and things like that. Luckily, you can be a polymath and you can express some of the same ideas in different media. And of course, the medium changes those ideas and maybe clarifies them, maybe confuses and diffuses them. So I suppose I do sampling in both music and in visuals. I'm a sort of appropriationist, and I tend to steal ideas from here and there and kind of put them together in new combinations. I used to do collage when I was in my late teens. I would just cut out pictures from magazines and stick them together in new orders. And it was a way to have an ironic distance from the things, usually advertising and editorial copy in magazines, that you would normally find, you know. When they're all in their real contexts, they have a kind of oppressive force of trying to persuade you to do things you don't want to do. But if you cut them up and put them together in new orders, unexpected truths are revealed. And so I had a lot of fun doing these large-scale collages, and also just, you know, Henri Matisse with his paper-cut art from late in his life was an influence on me. For instance, I used to do more abstract collages as well. And so what are my kind of aesthetic? I picked up this magazine the other day. It's a copy of So En, which is my favorite Japanese fashion magazine. It's from 2009, and it's got Aoyu on the front. And the little photographic feature in here with Aoyu is, I was just thinking to myself, that style is so me, you know, sort of second-hand clothes put together in this quite collage-y way. Just n'importe quoi, you know, this with that. Let's see if it works. Textures against other textures, clashes of fabrics, and references all going haywire and crazy. It's a kind of late postmodern style, if you like. Very much my style. So I was thinking, God, I'm so predictable liking that sort of stuff. The kind of things I like, you probably know by now. I like barcodes, I like museums, I like biennials, I like archives, I like libraries, I like second-hand stuff, I like Asia, modernism, pink things, spooky things, perverse things, existential things, literary things, schizoid stuff, Cold War stuff, post-punk, big distances in time and in space, exoticism, difference, dandyism, pottery. So talking of pottery, I was in Tokyo in 2018, staying in a pottery house in Zoshigaya, a pottery showroom, which opened occasionally. I had the upstairs flat, but the building opened occasionally to operate as a shop. But I also went to this museum on my sort of travels through Tokyo, called the Hatakeyama Memorial Museum of Fine Art, and it's an amazing bunker-like concrete building in a very leafy site near Shinagawa Station. And the kind of juxtaposition of these very traditional exhibits mostly about the tea ceremony. They have a lot of cultural treasures in there, but it's mostly all connected to, they have a tea house outside in the beautiful grounds, the gardens. And I bought these postcards of pots and made a big show of putting these on my shelves instead of real pots, which are kind of heavy and easy to break and all the rest of it. I would put these postcard pots as a kind of a surreal exhibit of, there might be a real pot standing on this shelf. So when I came to think about ideas for my sleeve, for some reason I just thought, well, I'll just sample something that's to hand visually here on my shelves, and I picked that postcard. It's a Ming vase. It says on the back, Chinese Ming vase, an important cultural property. It's a vase with a globular body and a long neck, design of a dragon and waves in underglazed blue. Jing Dizenware, Ming Dynasty, China. So this is actually an interesting cultural meme. I looked up TV Tropes, which is kind of a fun website, sort of in the tradition of Roland Barthes' mythologies, looking quite academically and seriously at popular culture tropes that you might find. And there's a really interesting page about the priceless Ming vase. So there's a husky lad who's knocking over a very precariously perched Ming vase in a museum while photographing another vase. Why? This rickety ladder in front of the door is the perfect place for this priceless Ming vase, isn't it? When a fragile and priceless item is featured in a work of comedy, it will inevitably be destroyed by the klutz, and there's a link to other instances of the klutz in popular culture. Despite their adoration for their prized treasures, the owners will not secure the item in a display case, but rather perch it precariously on a pedestal so it can be flipped over by the slightest breeze. It's traditionally a vase, but paintings, sculptures, heirlooms, other things will do, cultural treasures. So it's a good symbol of vulnerability. And I suppose when well, let's look at the way I've worked through, starting with this, just because I liked the image and thought it would be strong. It's in a way, it's an immodest way of saying this is my cultural treasure I'm offering the world. It's a cultural item, an album about coronavirus, but it's also a pot which I've thrown on my wheel. So let's look through the thought processes, the visual thinking processes, the same way I do for songs when I tell you about them here. I think it's interesting to look at the etiology of an idea, if that's the right word. An idea is not a disease, but the etymology also of visually of an idea. So it starts with this pot, and I've got a scanner over there, so I just scanned the postcard, front and back, because the back has these nice Japanese stamp slots, and I like the austerity of its layout on the back. I might use that on the back of the CD. So the first thing I did was do some drawings on my iPad. I have an Apple Pencil and an iPad, so I did some drawings of the pot, and my first idea was that the pot is shattering. It is a priceless Ming vase shattering. When we were kids, me and my brother and sister used to play that as a regular game. Oh, you smashed my precious Ming vase, crash ting-a-ling. There was even a BBC sound effects record with that precise sound of crash ting-a-ling of the Ming vase smashing that we would try to reproduce with our voices, So I tried, not that successfully, to make it look as if there's like a bullet hitting the Ming vase. The Ming vase, of course, looks like a globe. It looks like the world with swirling clouds on it. And so it's a fairly obvious symbol for the whole world being injured in some way. And the drawing was not that successful. I have a sort of naive drawing style. I'm a pretty terrible drawer. I don't like the way I write or draw. I've always really sort of fetishized other people's drawing and writing styles and tried to copy them, but hated my own. That's really how I feel. I kind of don't like the way I draw. Then I started thinking about what typeface would work on the cover, and I went to one of my other fetishes, which is sort of early computer aesthetics and IBM Selectric golf ball typefaces when they're trying to do cursive script. So I found a nice website with these typefaces called Script, Pinpoint and Telegraph Type, and sort of tried to mess around with those and did the Momus Vivid Patch 22, which is the catalogue number, in a kind of italic cursive script that came from IBM. And quite like that, but then I also thought, well, I really like hand-drawn lettering, like Eric Gill's kind of calligraphic lettering. So I found some Gill alphabets and then did my own hand-drawn versions of them, not very successfully. Then found this kind of slab of actually carved Gill typeface, not typeface, lettering, carved into marble, like you would find on a tombstone. And found that I liked the background, the sort of speckled marble background of that more than I liked the typography. So I just, in the end, smoothed out a big surface on the marble itself and used that texturally as a background. Then I accidentally highlighted the scan in Preview. I'm often shuttling between Apple Preview software and Photoshop, Adobe Photoshop, because I can do different things in those different programs. Some of them, the select tools works differently in both of those. So they're both useful. And as in audio software, I shuffle between Audacity and GarageBand, often re-importing things, from Audacity back into GarageBand and endlessly shuttlecocking. So I did the highlight thing, which makes everything pink. I often find this a very appealing thing in Preview, that the highlighting is so pink and it makes images have this pink cast. So I got the pink cast on the Vase scan and really liked what that looked like. And the next thing I did was try and put a cursive script on it saying Momus Vivid. The D looked a bit chopped off in this, and I thought also it's a bit trendy from about 5 years ago. People like Motto were doing this kind of informal cursive with typefaces with a kind of hand-painted look. It's kind of a little bit past its peak, that look, so I wasn't entirely sure. But then I thought, well, maybe the chopped off D at the end of Vivid, I could turn that into a curly line, like almost a creeper or ivy or something growing up through the image. So I tried that and got this rather Barbara Hepworth kind of look, or Henry Moore kind of modernist look, which I liked, creeping across the, done with the Apple Pencil again, creeping across the image. And, took away the typography and liked it even better, although it looked a little bit like a sort of swastika in some way, which, maybe that's not a bad association, seeing the coronavirus as a kind of Nazi, because it is bringing authoritarianism to the world with its extreme measures against it. Then I just thought, I much prefer the image very simple and stark with no drawing on top of it and no type on top of it at all. So I kind of went back to the basic image of the pinked vase on top of the marble. And the way it had fallen almost randomly, it had fallen in the form of a Joseph Albers homage to the square kind of painting. And I really like that because that minimalism and formalist modernism really kind of matches well the music in the album, which is kind of mid-20th century minimalist modernist style. So then I tried putting, a bit of the old Eric Gill carved funerary typography on there, and it just didn't improve things at all. I always find problems, putting any sort of type on the front of an album. That's why I often put labels, as if it's a sticky label, even when it's just an optical illusion, trompe-l'œil, and it doesn't peel off. Nevertheless, a label will give you a kind of conveniently reduced area to put the typography in. It doesn't sort of dominate the imagery. Because in a way, it's a bit like doing music without lyrics. When you do music without lyrics, people will pay attention much more to the musical stuff going on, and they will sort of impute their own meanings from the music itself, and these are much more abstract and kind of vague but powerful meanings that people get from art because there are no lyrics. And it's the same with type on a visual object like an album sleeve. It kind of reduces the imagery to sort of makes it play second fiddle, or makes it look like the cart that's or the horse that's drawing the cart, whatever that metaphor is. I then tried to do a kind of combination of the scan of the pot with the drawing of the pot smashing, and got something fairly acceptable but not really compelling. the pot being smashed apart with typography going on around it. Didn't really like that. The typography, the gilt typography, weirdly enough, started reminding me of Hollywood movie posters, which always use this font called Trajan. It's become a terrible cliche. They have this kind of Roman epic look to them because they use Trajan, or they used to. I don't know if they still do this, but there were some interesting graphic design essays about the overuse of Trajan on Hollywood movie posters. And it seems like an imperialistic font because of America's imperialistic hubris. Trajan, as if America was saying, we are the ancient Rome of now, and we're going to keep using this Trajan font to remind you of that fact. And also, when you have things shattering, exploding, going on fire, it also looks like a Hollywood movie poster. So when you combine that with Trajan, there's a certain kind of tug towards Hollywood. And Hollywood is one of the things which I reject. It's not on my list of fetish things. Anything Hollywood touches turns, as far as I'm concerned, to shit. What they did to the Italian Job or the Wicker Man, let's not even talk about that. Hollywood mostly appalls me. So, nevertheless, there's a lot of blood in Hollywood productions, and my next thought was, instead of having this pot exploding, why don't we just put a couple of drops of blood on it to show that there's damage of some kind, of medical damage going on. So that was the next avenue that I started pursuing. As with making a song, there's usually just one idea you have at a time, and then as you're executing that idea, another idea comes to you, and so on and so on. So making things is just an endless process of small decisions, and they're all based on these aesthetic prejudices and preferences that you have that are inbuilt, and so it feels very seamless and automatic that it's an endlessly branching kind of tree that takes you towards something you will like, because it's your preferences which are always making you make one choice rather than the other. But of course there are a lot of dead-end avenues. So in this process, I then came to going back to this very simple cover with the pink pot, with a little speck of blood trickling down the pot, which looks quite sinister and surreal. The pot almost looks breast-like, so it's like a nipple that's bleeding or something like that. And then I put on a barcode, and I put on one of my fetish stamps is from the Maison Franco-Japonaise in Tokyo library. So I put that on under the barcode, and then did some IBM typography saying Momus Vivid, which looked okay. It looks like an academic library book about pots that's got a little bit worn over the years, and I quite liked that, but it was a little bit too close to this sort of pseudo-didactic look of a lot of my books and records recently, so I wasn't really crazy about that. I then tried doing a kind of vowel-free version, again with the sort of Trajan-like font, just saying MMSVVD, because there is obviously a symmetry. Momus and Vivid both have 5 letters, and they both have 3 consonants with 2 vowels in the middle. So in a way you could start playing with that, but I didn't like the result really. I mean, it looks a bit like a Roman date, Roman numerals, but which is kind of, I guess, going back to closer Joy Division and Peter Saville kind of style, which is okay. It's an okay reference to make. Then I tried it with a speck of blood, a smear of blood becoming the eye in Vivid. But you start to get into kind of clever advertising-like ideas there, and I really don't like that. That's not subtle enough, and it's a bit too clever. So I then decided it needed maybe a coronavirus shape in there. Although I was very wary of actually showing the coronavirus, but I thought, okay, I'm going to draw a rough outline of what the coronavirus looks like with its stellae. And so I kind of tried putting that in. It was quite a nice contrast, the sort of rough drawing on top of the smooth photography and the marble. I began to think this is the kind of thing you might see in Documenta or the Venice Biennale. It's quite a nice artwork in its own right, and I was, rather arrogantly thinking, I could be quite a good visual artist if I really set my mind to it. But I thought this is getting a bit literal, but and then it didn't really. I accidentally erased the circular outline of the corona, and it looked actually better with just the stellae. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll put a red spot in the center and make it like a sun because the corona in Corona, it's kind of based on a crown, but it also looks like a sun with kind of flares coming out from it. So I did this little red spot, and it's something I keep trying to do. I think when I was making attempts at my own design for Glyptotech, which eventually went to Hagen Verlage, I did a lot of animal designs with red spots on them, blocking out parts of the animal. I don't know why, red spots are something I just keep coming back to. It looks a bit like the Japanese flag, but it also looks like a sail sticker on an artwork. And then I kind of tried just putting the corona in different positions and making it look as if it's destroying the pot. And in some versions it looked like Takashi Murakami's Lonesome Cowboy, which is a sculpture of a boy masturbating with a huge plume of sperm coming out of his cock, and he's a cowboy with a cowboy hat and spurs and stuff, and weirdly kind of almost Tom of Finland kind of imagery. So I had this explosion coming out of the top of the pot, the corona looking like a splat of sperm with a red sun in the middle of it, and it was okay. Then I tried making it a kind of volcano, making it look like the pot was on fire inside and there was some smoke coming out the top. But then I thought, well, the imagery of that is like a laboratory test tube explosion or something, and it begins to veer too close to the idea that Trump's been sort of tediously laying out, which is that the coronavirus originated in a lab in China and was a kind of, project. So I didn't want to go anywhere near that kind of allegation or reference. It's obviously idiotic. And but I did try combining that with the splat and with the spot, and as you do, a few accidents here and there. There was this rather nice accident where I dropped I chopped the photograph in two, and then found that it even worked quite nicely with a central divide and so on. But none of it was particularly compelling, and none of it was getting stronger. It was getting more fussy, getting weaker. I tried some eye-type designs, so instead of the red spot, a white spot with a black retina. So I guess that would refer to my parasitical eye condition. It might be meaningful for me, but maybe not for anyone else. Also, it started looking like the CBS logo, which I think Paul Rand designed for CBS in the early 60s. Different versions of the eye. They were okay, but not very compelling. There was also a totally different avenue where I didn't do the pink highlighted idea. I just had the straight scan with his blue and white look, and then tried some, again, the Roman typography, the funerary Eric Gill typography, and then did some stuff with the corona drawing and with dotted highlight outlines. None of it was particularly compelling, so I went back to the very simple straight one with just the drop of blood and then the barcode, which in the meantime I'd gone to James at Darlow and said, what is our barcode number for this release, and got the real actual barcode. So in the end I just finished with this very simple image, and when I explained it I put it on Facebook and explained that it's a Ming vase from China, which shows signs of an injury, so the blood coming out of the Ming vase or splattered onto the Ming vase from an injury. It's got a barcode which looks a bit like a plaster. And so there's sort of the idea that selling the experience might be a healing process. The selling itself, the barcode, might somehow address the wound and dress the wound. Which is my experience, singing about things. Art is great therapy, and singing about things has been the best therapy in my life. I've never done proper therapy, but I've been a self-therapist in terms of being a songwriter who shows my wound, in the great phrase of Joseph Beuys, show your wound. And it really helps to share. A problem shared is a problem halved. And then there was a sense of the allusion to Albert's homage to the square, and that brings in the idea of formalism and minimalism, which is in the musical Ready, and the pot as a bleeding globe. So there it is. That's kind of what I hope the image says. It seems to have had very positive responses so far. I haven't seen anyone saying, it's a bit boring. Of course, people perhaps just keep that to themselves if they think it's boring. The record label might be thinking it's not commercial enough. But we've done lots of covers, like Terpsichore, Huggins' Terpsichore cover with no typography on the front, or even pantaloon had no typography, and I think it makes the imagery stronger, and it just makes it a nice aesthetic object to have around you. I think the spine is where you put your title and everything, and you don't need imagery on the front. That's one of the very first things Alan McGee said to me when I arrived at Creation. He said, you can make the covers as arty as you want, don't put any title, artist name, anything if you don't want those, just do what you want. Because of course the boutique labels of the early 80s, 4AD, Factory, didn't necessarily have covers, have titles and typography cluttering up the front. I mean, 23 Envelope did use a lot of type, but especially the Factory label didn't, and that looked really cool. It looked kind of insouciant. So I'm sort of still in that mindset. This is the thing about having preferences. You're kind of doomed to keep repeating the obsessions of your generation, which is fine because, I'm probably selling to a lot of people who either are my same generation and will pick up those references and allusions and signs in a nostalgic way, or else I'm selling records to young people who are very fascinated with the 80s as a kind of archaeological era, who were born in the 90s or later, but who nevertheless find it interesting that that was a different time and we had different styles then, and what were our obsessions then, what were not just the mainstream styles, but also the alternative styles of the 70s and 80s. So this is all the stuff that you're playing with in the visuals that you might also be playing with in the music, and this is one reason it's good to have the same artist or the same person involved in both. It is nice to bring a fresh angle, but I'm so obsessed with all this stuff and all this imagery and all these cultural allusions and things that I think it's really fun for me to, every second album or so, every second book or so, to do it myself and to assure some kind of continuity in the imagery. That's all I have for you today, and enjoy your day and your week.
Open University.